Okay, I think we are ready to get started. Thank you all for joining me today. I apologize about the late change of date. Had some things come up on Wednesday, but I'm happy we are able to do this today. Again, all this will be recorded and posted online. So if you need to leave early or if you have someone that you know that wasn't able to make it, this will all be available. So don't worry about that. All right. So I'm going to officially get started here. Good morning. My name is Colin Westwood with Washington Golf. We're going to be today talking about scores and how they relate to handicapping. So thank you for joining us. So the first thing I want to talk about today is just scores in general. And, you know, since they are what allows us to make a handicap, it's very important that when people post them, they're posting correctly. So one of the things we want to talk about today is the acceptability of stores. What stores are okay to post? Where do we have issues or what are the requirements for a store being postable? And so the main one is that when you play or that the format of play is in accordance with the rules of handicapping. So an example of ones that do not count are scrambles, because they don't format to the rules of handicapping, since you're able to hit someone else's ball and so forth. This rule can be expanded because it also includes not only the rules of handicapping, but the rules of golf in general. So scores in both match play and stroke play, including multi-ball or team competitions, um, where players have not completed one or more holes, or players are requested to pick up when out of contention on a hole. So what that's saying is that match play, stroke play, all those scores are acceptable. Not finishing holes or conceding holes or skipping holes, that does not mean that the score is not acceptable. We have some other things that come into play when those situations come up, which we'll talk about here in a minute. Nets, one of the big things is that for a score to be postable, it has to be played on a golf course that has a course rating and slope. Currently in the US, most 18 and 9 hole courses have a course rating slope. Ones that currently do not are short 9-hole courses, under 3,000 yards or under 1,500 yards for 9 holes. Now, this is one of the things that is most likely going to be changing next year, where the USGA and the World Handicap System incorporates shorter golf courses. So, for example, Interbay, which currently does not have a course rating and slope, so you cannot post scores you play there. Next year, it will have one because of this change that the USGA is coming out with. So all scores that are posted must be played under the rules of golf. This means that going out there and playing golf, not following the rules, moving your ball, not taking penalties, all those are reasons why the score would not be acceptable. And this is a big part of that. You have to be accompanied by at least one other person. What the USGA found is that if you're playing by yourself with not even an observer, you're less likely to follow the rules of golf. So that was one of the big changes that came about when we moved to the World Handicap System, or actually just a little before that, was a requirement that someone has to be with you when you're playing for it to be acceptable. So what this is talking about here says when a player follows a model local rule, even if the committee has not adopted it, the USGA and the rules of handicapping, rules of golf, there are a couple different rule or local rules that are allowed for clubs to be used, such as the stroke and distance for out of bounds and yellow hazards. And what it allows for is because you're still following the general rules of golf, you're still following the rules of golf. So even though maybe the club hasn't adopted that local rule or the committee at the club, because you're still following under the rules of golf, it's still an acceptable score. In most cases, this isn't really going to happen, but it's just something I wanted to point out. So in general, acceptability scores is you played with at least one person with you, you played under the rules of golf, and you followed the rules of handicapping. For the most part, pretty basic. Unacceptable scores in general are anything that breach that. Anything that didn't follow the rules of golf, anything that would be considered non-standard or a non-standard format, such as scramble, or a big one that a lot of clubs do is play they play a competition where they limit the number of clubs. That would not be considered an acceptable score because because you wouldn't be following the rules of golf. The rules of golf allow you to have 14 clubs, so if you're limiting that, therefore you're breaking those rules, and that would not be allowed. So for again, pretty simple, pretty straightforward, but just something I want to reiterate. The other two that you'll see here that I pointed out specifically was alternate shot, scrambles, but being coached is another big one. Because a lot of people will take lessons, and if you're just taking a lesson on a range, that's no problem. But there's also playing lessons where the pro will come out with you and play around. And during that round, he will help evaluate and such. That is considered being coached while playing and is not considered a postable score. Now, this is different from having a caddy. If you play in an event where caddies are allowed and you have a caddy there who's helping you read putts and giving you shot lengths, that is acceptable, but it's considered different from being coached. So there is a slight difference there, but it's important. Another big one is what we have to deal with here is the active season. So currently in Washington, our non-posting season is November 15th to the end of February. The main reason we have this is due to weather conditions and course conditions during those months. During those months in the general part of Washington, most courses are significantly wetter or play significantly different from how we rate golf courses, which is high summer. This is something that I'll get into in a future webinar about course rating, but I want to bring it up here just because of how many clubs bring it up as questions in the wintertime. The reason we have the off season, like I said, is primarily due to course conditions and weather. If we allowed people to post scores during that time frame, then we would be finding handicaps being adversely affected by those scores. Now, a lot of people reach out to me and go, well, my course is fine. There's no problem there. And that's absolutely true. There are certainly courses in Washington that you could play all year round and be very similar. The problem comes in is that this decision has to be made on a statewide basis. We can't say, this course is good for these months, this course is good for these months. It's statewide, so we have to do what is generally best for all the golf courses. And that's why we still have the off season currently. And we're not the only ones. Idaho, Oregon, the other northern states, most of them have some sort of off season. All right, sorry about a little tangent there. Back to scores. So a few of the times where you would be able to post a score, but you didn't play a full round. That's what we're going to talk about now. So example for if you were out playing and you did not complete a full 18 holes. Currently, the minimum number to post an 18-hole score is 14 holes. So any any number between 14 and 17, you can still post a full 18-hole score. For the holes you do not play, you'll post a net par, which we'll talk about here in a minute. For a 9-hole score, the minimum is 7 holes. So if you were to play 13 holes, you would post only a 9-hole score for the front 9 that you played. If you played 8 holes, you'd post those plus net par for your 9th hole. Now, if you only went out and played 4 or 5 holes, that would not be postable and could not be counted. So maximum hole score. This is one of the big changes that came about with the World Handicap System and is the main reason I highly encourage everyone to post hole by hole. So maximum hole score used to be based off of your handicap index, and it was for every hole you had a maximum. Now the maximum is net double bogey. This means that you need to know your handicap for the tees that you're playing, your course handicap, and you need to know where those strokes fall on the golf course. Because if you're a 19 handicap, you have 1 stroke per hole, but on the number 1 handicap hole, you have 2. So all of a sudden, your net double bogey is different. So because of this, I highly recommend everyone post hole by hole because this computer will figure all of it out for you. So we're gonna give some examples of net double bogey and how it's calculated. So double bogey is par plus 2 strokes, and then we have plus or minus any handicap strokes received or given. The reason there's a minus on there is for anyone with a positive handicap, that means they have to give strokes back. If you have a +1 handicap, that means, and for the course handicap, it's a +1. That means on the handicap hole number 1, you would be giving back a stroke. So let's say the first handicap hole is a par 5. Net double bogey or double bogey is a 7, and with -1, that'd be a 6 would be your maximum. For most of us, it would be 8. So here's an example for par 4 with a stroke index of 6, and you have 1 stroke received on that hole. So the par is 4, 2 strokes for double bogey, 1 stroke for your shot received, maximum is 7. So we're just going to show how that's going to affect score here. So here we have a course handicap of 18, meaning you have 1 stroke on every hole. You'll see the scores on the bottom there, and currently the ones that we're going to be looking at is hole 17, which is a par 4, and the score is an 8. So gross score here is a 95 total. When we post, we want to post an adjusted gross score, which means a gross score then adjusted for maximum hole score. On hole 17, we had a par 4. The stroke index or handicap hole was 6. Since our course handicap is 18, we did a handicap stroke on that hole. Net double bogey would be a 7, so that 8 would be brought down by 1 stroke to a 7, which would turn our gross score into an adjusted gross score, a 94. So Janet Smith would be posting a 94, not a 95. Now, if she were to post this all hole by hole on the Gin app or gin.com, the system would figure this out for her. She'd be able to put in the 8 and it would adjust it to the 7 automatically for her. So competition, there's a key one, is that the competition, if you're competing, would still use the full gross score 95, but handicap purposes would be a 94. For your events, if you run things through Golf Genius, it does all this calculation for you and you don't have to worry about it. All right. So now we're going to talk about what happens with those holes that we didn't play or we had to concede concede halfway through the hole, or we started playing the hole and lightning happened and we had to leave. So any holes that you just flat out don't play, you would count as net par. Net par means that it is par plus any handicap strokes you receive. So, and again, an important reason to know what your course handicap is and where strokes fall. If you again post hole by hole, the system will figure all this out for you so you don't have to worry about it. Now, just like we talked before with the number of holes that you must play, for 18 holes, if you played 14 and then quit, for the 15, 16, 17, 18, you would post net par for all those. Numerous reasons this can happen, but as long as you did not tee up on the hole, this is the formula you use is net par. Now, let's say you teed off on the hole. You started the hole, you at least put a ball off the tee. If you hit at least a tee shot, then we don't use not played, we use most likely. So as long as the hole was started, rather than saying net par, we're going to use what we would most likely have shot if we had finished a hole. Here's some general guidelines that the USGA has. So if you're playing a match play and you're within 5 feet, chances are you're going to make it unless you concede because the other person has already put in for birdie and you're putting for a bogey. If you pick up, the chances of you making, a 5-footer is probably pretty good. So just saying add 1 stroke for that. And then as long as you're on the green, 5 to 20 yards from the hole, 2 to 3, depending on your feeling. There's no set standard for most likely score. This is where, honor and personal responsibility comes into play with handicapping, and you really have to determine what is most likely for yourself. If you hit a tee shot and you have to leave all of a sudden, and you're right in the middle of the fairway on a straight, easy par 4, if you're a bogey player, most likely you're going to shoot a bogey. That is pretty common for you. But let's say you're out in the rough or there's water right in front. Maybe you go up by 1. It's all based on what is most appropriate for you, most likely for you, and that's a decision that you have to make, but is allowed for handicapping. Now, one important thing that I want to mention, so I'm going to go back here to holes not played. Now, as we talked about, for an 18-hole score, you have to have played 14 holes for it to count, and the other 4 you can use holes not played. Now, that same rule of only using this for 4 holes does not apply to most likely. If you're playing if you're playing around, you can use most likely score as many times as needed. As long as you started each hole, you could theoretically use this on 18 holes. Now, that's very unlikely and not common, but there isn't any guideline saying you can only use most likely score this many times on a round of golf. So that's an important one to note. So even if you concede on 9 holes, you still would post all those. So we talked about this last week, but I just want to reiterate it. Time frame for submitting a score. Because of PCC and because of nightly revisions, scores should be posted as soon as possible, meaning on the day of play. So before midnight local time, your scores should be posted to GIN. It is not a full-on requirement, meaning if you don't, there's a penalty, but it is something that everyone should do their best to do, and it is warranted for a handicap committee to talk to people if they routinely do not, especially if it looks like they are trying to manipulate something. So Again, we talked about this last week, but I just wanted to reiterate it. We talked about scores for obtaining a handicap index. The minimum number of scores posted is 318 holes or 54 holes in each combination. Currently, 9-hole scores are combined, meaning that once you post a 9-hole score, it gets banked in your record. You will see it in there, but it shows up at the bottom under has like a 9-hole area. Once another 9-hole one is entered, the two scores combine into an 18-hole score. The course ratings are added together, same with the slopes. The slopes are averaged, excuse me. Now, this is going to be changing next year. We'll be talking about that more in future uh, webinars, seminars, once the USGA has everything finalized. But we're currently looking like starting next year, 9-hole scores will be scaled up. So that's going to be a big change that we'll definitely be talking about more. Oh, well, so I missed a slide. Let me see if I can find it real quick. Apologize. Where is it? Well, I'm not sure what happened with that slide, but the other one I wanted to talk about with stores was store types. So when you post a store and when you're viewing your scoring record, currently there are a couple different store types. There's H for home, and a home store means that you are a member of that course or that club that plays there. So if you're a member of the home course men's club and play at the home course, that's a home store. Now, if you're a member of a traveling golf league that plays everywhere, they don't really have a home golf course. But there are other leagues that, while they are not directly associated with the golf course, they play at one more often than the other, and they can consider that their home course. Away stores are pretty much anywhere else other than home. Now, you can't have more than one home course. Want to make sure that's clear. So any number, as long as you're a member of a club, that would be considered your home course. If you're a member of 5 different clubs, those would all be your home courses. So there's no limit there. So home and away primarily are for record keeping. They don't actually affect your handicap any differently than the other. Competition is a C. And again, this is more for record keeping, allowing you and your handicap committee to see how you play in competitions versus home versus away. The next one is an N. N stands for 9, or the combined 9 holes. And then finally, there's a P for penalty. This is where your handicap committee can issue a penalty to a player who has not been posting correctly or has been manipulating their handicap. If there's some issue, that is something that the handicap committee can do, and it would show up as a P. Starting next year, we will be seeing a new store type called L for lead, and this will allow leads or members to then this is be a very helpful thing because you'll be able to post scores as a lead, and you can actually go back and see what their handicap would be just counting those scores. So very nice change, and something that I think we're all would be really grateful for when we see it come. But so that is my webinar for today. Oh, nice and short. Oh, sorry about my slide missing there, but so I just want to say, is there any questions? Anything I can answer for you today? I know this was definitely on the shorter side, but I think we covered the most important things. So I'm going to take a minute and answer any questions for anybody. Please feel free to write them in the question or chat box, or if you think about it later, send me an email. Happy to help. My email, so in case anybody doesn't know, is C as in Colin, and then Westwood at wagolf.com. My phone number is 253-214-2915. Feel free to call me or write me with any questions. So I'm just going to hang out for a minute and answer anything that anybody has. So Mike Steffi asks, is there any way that the portal or the admin portal can notify a handicap chair if someone posts a double store? Sadly, there isn't, Mike. I think the reason that this is, that they don't have a warning or anything like that, is specifically for people who play 36 holes and maybe they score the same. So I guess there is that chance that it could be legitimate. So there is not a warning system, sadly. So happy to answer anything else. I'm just trying to hang on the line here for another minute or two. So that way, if anyone has anything, please send it over. Well, thank you everyone for joining me today. Um, this was the length that I've kind of been planning on my webinars being, about a half hour to make them nice and quick and easy. But again, thank you for joining me, and I will see you on the next one. Everyone have a good weekend and enjoy.